Welcome back, everyone. This is another project example of how to do a Lean Six Sigma project. And in this case, it's for the service industry. If you've ever worked in a call center, this is a great example of how to reduce abandonment rates and improve customer satisfaction in a call center. We're going to go through that right now. Okay, so let's say you work in a call center and your hold times are too long. Your customers are abandoning their calls. They're frustrated because you're not responsive. How do you fix that problem? Well, this was a big problem for one of my clients. They were doing a huge volume of calls every day. They are one of the world's largest credit card processors, and they have lots of customers. They're retail customers, people that have, a little credit card machine on your desk if you're a restaurant or a business, and you have to take orders every day. And if you run into trouble, guess who you call? They were struggling because their customers were not being able to get their answer solved in a timely manner, and they would call in and not even be able to get a hold of anyone. So they put together a team as part of their Lean Six Sigma Greenbelt training to go and try and solve this problem. Now, if you're not familiar with a call center, basically what you have is a room with a bunch of desks, people wearing headsets, and every time a call comes in, they see it in their queue, and then it gets randomly assigned to whoever is able to answer the call next. So if somebody in the call center is taking too long to talk to one customer, other customers are probably waiting on hold. And that hold time is one of the key metrics that people care about in a call center. The other thing that matters is how long the calls take, because that affects the hold time. And those two things directly affect customer satisfaction. So we had a major problem we need to fix. Now, we used the Lean Six Sigma DMAIC project format for this. And the DMAIC format is define the problem, measure the current process, analyze the process to find the root cause of your problems, then implement improvements and do experiments to make changes to see if you can make the process better. And finally, check to see if those improvements are actually working, and then put a control in place, or many visual controls, documentation, training, and things like that to make sure the new process actually sticks. So that's the format we're going to go through right now. As you can see on the page, this is a project charter. This is the first thing you want to complete in the define phase of a project. So we have the project scope. The scope of this project is to reduce talk and hold times, which will in turn potentially lower abandonment rates for inbound calls. This particular project does not include call monitoring or financial write-offs. So the whole goal here, reduce call wait times, right? And you can see that down in the baselines below. What are the metrics we're going to use to measure the success of this project? Well, the call talking time, what percentage of those calls take more than 5 minutes? That's our cutoff point, our limit. We need our calls to take less than 5 minutes. And the reason for that is that's what our whole staffing model is based on. So if you're staffing a call center, right, you have a certain number of employees, you have a certain amount of expected call volume, and you need to forecast, well, how many employees do I need so that people don't have to be on hold for very long? And then how long do those employees need to take? It's actually the exact same equation that you use in a production environment to calculate inventory levels or Kanban levels. You calculate your demand, your lead time and cycle time for doing an activity, and you calculate how many people you need, or how much inventory you need in the case of a production schedule. So the business objective here is this. In the last 6 months, there have been 10,987 calls lasting more than 5 minutes. This is 24% of our calls. So because of that, we're having to hire more people because we can't keep up with the call volume. With this many calls, how do we keep the same staffing level and become more responsive? Well, to do that, we got to shrink our hold times and our call times. So our goal is to reduce the talk and hold times, and then improve our inbound process to better support the customer and offer them other ways of support. And I'll get to what that means here in just a second. This is the team, or I should say teams, that were involved in this project. So obviously we had the project leaders down here at the bottom, but we also had a lot of other folks that were involved in this. These were different teams from different shifts, and they all had input, and they were all stakeholders to this process and this problem. Once you've got your project charter finished and you've taken a team photo, you've done your stakeholder analysis, then it's time to move out of the define phase and on into the measure phase. In the measure phase, you're primarily doing two things. Number one, you want to create a value stream map that maps out the current state process, looking for waste, variation, and overburdening of the employees. The second thing you want to do is gather data. So let's go one at a time through those. This is the value stream map. You'll notice the boxes here representing the different steps of the process. First, we answer the call. Then we understand the customer's question, look up the case in our system, review the case documentation to try to get the right answer, and then provide that answer to the customer and make sure that their concern is resolved. Those are all value-added steps, but we still need to do those as quickly as possible. Then after that, we have some red and yellow colored steps, which indicate these are completely non-value add. We're actually having to load and log each call into Salesforce. and the system is slow and it's taking us a long time to log those. And that doesn't really add any value in the eyes of the customer. So this is one of those things when you're doing an activity, you have to think of, okay, is this really a value-added activity in the customer's eyes? If it's not, you have to call it waste. Now, that doesn't mean it's not critical to the company because, of course, you could and should track your performance in a system like Salesforce. You need to know how you're performing, but you need to do that activity as quickly as possible, which is why these are called, required waste sometimes, because you're required to do these activities to run your business. Now, down below, you'll see some boxes that show the issues. These are gaps or problems that we saw at every step along the process of things that we could maybe do better, some waste we could eliminate just to make this process run a little bit smoother. One of those main issues that we ran into was escalations. What we found was a lot of our new employees didn't have the answers to the customer's questions, so they would have to escalate to somebody who was an expert, who knew the answers. And the root cause of that was simply they weren't finding the answers in the system quickly enough. The answers were in our electronic database, but the new employees didn't know how to get to the answer, or it was difficult to understand what was written there. And so what they would do is just default to escalating to somebody who knew it better than them. And so now, instead of having all of our new frontline workers handling the calls, everything's basically getting funneled up to the experts, and that's a smaller team. And that's much more expensive, right? And we don't have enough resources there. So this was a big issue that we needed to solve. The team went one step further and they took their analysis and turned it into an input process output diagram, or what we call here a SIPOC diagram. That's basically looking at all the process inputs and outputs, identifying which ones are affecting the critical to quality requirements of our customer, which in this case is our hold time and the ability to answer the customer's question. And then they broke that out further into what we call an FMEA, or failure modes effects analysis. This is an FMEA. Think of an FMEA as like a Pareto. It's a simple chart to help you prioritize where your problems are and which problems you should work on first. So on the left, you have your process steps going down the left-hand side. So you're answering the call, you're understanding the question, you're looking up the case in the ADRP system. And along the way, you're finding all the different failure modes that can happen along the line. Now, if you want to correlate that back to the value stream map, you can go up here and say, okay, all these problems that you see underneath each step in the value stream map, those same problems or failure modes are what show up here in the FMEA. Then what the FMEA does, it says, okay, when that problem happens, how severe is it? And that number goes in the severity column right here. How often does it occur? It goes in the occurrence column. How easy is it to actually detect that problem so we can maybe catch it before it becomes a problem? You put that number in the right column. So the higher the number, the worse it is. Okay. And then you multiply those together and you get what we call an RPN, or a risk priority number. And the risk priority number is simply a ranking system to say which of these problems could potentially be the most hazardous to your business or to your customer's experience. So you can see a couple here that have really high numbers. Those were highlighted in yellow, and those told us basically, hey, we need to focus in those areas, make sure we go actually solve those problems. So that's the first part of the measure phase. The second part of the measure phase is to go get the actual data from the process to see how you're performing. On this chart, you can see the average talk times. And what we're measuring here is per shift or per team, what percentage of the calls take longer than 5 minutes. Our goal is to be under 20%, under 10%, but right now we're at 21%. That's really bad. So on average, customers can experience, 21% of our customers are experiencing longer than a 5-minute time on the phone to get an answer to their problem. And that's going to be really expensive. As you know, if you've watched the statistics modules as part of the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt training, you know there are two things you want to measure with your data. You always want to measure the mean or the average. And the second thing you always want to measure is the variation. In this case, we're looking at the range. So how much variation is there between different teams and different shifts in the percentage of calls greater than 5 minutes? And it looks like we have about a 12% variation. Now, why is that important? Well, because some customers may experience on average a 5-minute, call time, but because of the amount of variation, some customers may experience much longer or much shorter. And that variation is what ends up killing you in the end, because you have to account for that variation. You have to account for maybe on a given day, 30% or 35% of the calls are taking more than 5 minutes, which means your hold times are going up, which means your customers are getting really frustrated, right? So when you improve a process, you're always looking to improve either the average performance and improve that, in this case, lowering it, or you're looking at reducing the amount of variation, or both. Typically, if you can improve both of those things, great. Then you're going to have even more success with your new process. And to show that point, we use what we call a CPK, or a process capability diagram. And the big red lines you see on this chart are the goal lines, right? We want to be between those goalposts. And you can see that our data is shifted to the right. It's outside the goalpost. That means our calls are taking too long. In fact, 56.9% of our calls are taking or of our data is greater than 5 minutes. So how do we fix that? Well, if your goalposts are here and your process is over here, the first thing you need to do is shift the process into the goalpost. So you're moving the average performance closer to the middle. And then the second thing you can do is shrink the amount of variation that you're seeing so that you can fit more of the process within the goalpost or the process capability limits. And we know there's a correlation between the call times and the hold times. So we're also looking at the data from the hold times. And we looked at the percentage of on-hold times that are more than 2 minutes. And again, our average here is about 9%, which is higher than we want. But again, you can see the spikes, right? Lots of variation there as well. Were those due to Thanksgiving and Christmas? Most likely. And the reason for that is obvious, right? A lot of people are shopping at Thanksgiving. A lot of people are running their credit cards. So people running into problems goes way up, and the people calling the call center goes way up. You also might have, at the exact same time that you have all this higher volume, a decrease in the number of employees that are working because people have time off. So you run into this problem from both sides, right? We have more demand and fewer people to service that demand. And together, that's just going to dramatically increase your call wait times and your talk times. Putting that same data on a process capability chart shows, again, about 97% of our calls are out of spec for hold time. So our hold times are just, they're way too long, way longer than we want them to be. So what does that correlation look like between the hold times and the call times? Well, this is actually a really interesting chart, right? Because if you look on the bottom, look on the x-axis along the bottom, the call volume, you'll see at the busiest times when the call volume is going up, notice how the trend line is going down. The percent of calls on hold for 2 minutes or more actually goes down when you get a higher call volume. Now, if you think about this, right, this is the opposite of what you would expect, right? If you think about when the call volume increases, you'd think that the hold times would get longer, and yet they're dropping. And so we tried to figure this out. Like, why in the world would the hold times be going down? And what we think happens, and when we talk to the employees, what we got agreement from them as to what happens is when they see the queue, right? They see the number of people waiting to get on a call. It actually is motivating to them. They actually move quicker and get through their calls quicker. Hopefully not by sacrificing quality or not giving a good answer to the customer. I don't know. I don't have a quality metric here, but they're actually seeing that backlog. And so they're moving faster and getting off the call quicker. So having that high call volume actually leads to improved performance and reduced hold times, which is really, really interesting. So sometimes your data just doesn't tell you what you think it's going to tell you. Sometimes it tells you the opposite. And that's exactly why in Lean Six Sigma, we use data and we have a data-driven approach, because that data-driven approach is going to tell us where to go, what to work on, as opposed to just using our gut and our intuition. Okay, so that's the measure phase. Now we're in the analyze phase. And in the analyze phase, what we're trying to do is find the root cause of the problem. So in this case, we're using a simple 5 whys. The symptom that we're trying to solve is this high abandonment rate. And some of the whys behind that were, well, maybe we're not aware of the dispute status. So that's the customer. They're not aware of, if they have a dispute, what the status of that dispute is. Somebody called in and says the credit card should have been challenged. They don't know what the response is, and they're just waiting. Should they wait 1 day, 5 days, 10 days? How long do they have to wait? They don't know. Why is that? Well, they're not receiving notifications of when the dispute is resolved or the fact that it's in status. Imagine you're getting an order from Amazon and you don't know when it's going to ship and you don't have a shipping number. You're just left in the dark. And that's how our customers were feeling. Why don't they receive notifications? Well, sometimes they do, but they don't understand the notification. Sometimes the request dispute reporting isn't right? We don't have accurate reporting. We don't actually have the due date. Sometimes there's multiple cases in review, and so the customer doesn't know which case they're looking at, or they got multiple notifications. So the bottom line here is there isn't a good process for notifying the customer of whether their dispute status is pending or completed or where it's at. A lot of that may be because of new employees. It could be because we just have too much backlog in our work, or it could just be that the whole process, the electronic email system isn't working at all for us. So what do? We dug into our online case management system. We said, look, we need more people to be able to self-serve. We need more people to actually use the online case management system to go and check their status on their own and be educated in that. And that means we're going to have to educate our customers. We're going to have to actually teach them how to use the system to make them be able to not have to call in, right? They can just go figure it out on their own. 32.75% of our callers are calling for a status check. That's 1/3 of our callers. So if we can just get those people to self-serve, we can reduce our call volume by 1/3, and boom, that's going to fix a lot of our hold time problems and make our customers a lot happier. So we put some work into that, and we started to see an increase. So we got a 7% increase in the OCM participants. That's our case management system, and over 1,000 new users. And that's actually driving revenue for the company as well. So that's excellent, getting more people to use that system. And that involved improving the process for communicating what the system is, who can use it, how to log in. And we put a lot of that information out on the website. And then anytime somebody called in for a status check, we would actually use that time to coach and educate them so that in the future, they wouldn't have to call us again. So a little bit of investment for a later return. Then we made some other process improvements, right? And we're in the improve phase, by the way, now. Obviously, we're making improvements, changes. We're experimenting with some new things. So that's the improve phase of the DMAIC. We began to review the voice of the customer reports and then look at the time gaps in the phones being answered. So these were the customers of our in-house customers, right? This was our team that was on the phones asking them, what can we do differently? How do we get you from one call to the next? What's slowing you down? And we found out, again, one of the biggest things was the time to log the call into Salesforce. Then we began to look at our hot alerts from our customer care team to look at hold times because of hot alerts. What are these emergency situations that are coming up that we're having to deal with? Third thing, implementing additional emails to answer questions. So not only can customers go online to our OCM system, but they can also use an email system. So if they send us an email request or question, we can have an email response to that. We have a special team for that. It's actually much faster and much less expensive than a phone call. So guiding more people from our website to either the OCM system or to the email system is going to cut down on our call times and call volume as well. Finally, changing productivity requirements. So if you've watched any of my other trainings in Lean Six Sigma, it's all about visual management. And so how do you make a sign in the work area to show people how they're performing? What's their hold time on average for their team? What's their average call time? How good is their team at answering the question the first time without having to escalate to the tier 2 team? So what we did is we made all those metrics visible by team, by area, so that people knew how they were performing, because what you measure gets managed, right? And you want people to focus on the metrics that matter the most. Putting those things in place and those metrics in place in the office environment just creates a kind of a friendly competition, right? You've got a team of people, and if they're, competitive at all in any way, they're going to think, Team B is doing better at hold times than we are. What can we do today to fix that, guys? And let's go work on that. Or this team is doing a really good job of answering the question within 2 minutes. Why can't we do that? And they're going to get a little competitive and work on ways to provide better service to the customer. And eventually, everybody wins. That's the scenario there. And that moves us into the control phase, or the last phase of the DMAIC process. In the control phase, you're checking to see whether your improvements are working. And if they are, you're locking them in place. You're putting documentation in place. We're updating all of our SOPs. We're doing some training, make sure all the teams on all the shifts are cross-trained and understand how the new process works, how to guide customers toward the online and email systems, putting visual controls in place like I just talked about, making sure all the signage and all the metrics are visible to everyone, and then putting a follow-up plan in place. This is probably the most maybe missed part of the whole system here. In order for a process to stick, the managers have to really care about the process and go back and check on it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Go talk to the employees and ask them, how's the new system working? Is there anything else we need to fix? Is there anything I can do to make it better for you? And the project doesn't just end, there's this ongoing Kaizen continuous improvement mentality that you have to have, where you're still tweaking, fine tuning the process even after you go into the control phase. So don't skip the follow-up step, right? Make sure you have a plan in place to go and be hands-on at the Gemba, the place where the work is happening, to make sure that you're talking to the people that are doing the work to get feedback and make changes as you go. So what was the ROI, or return on investment, for this project? Well, we spent about 80 hours of labor for the project leaders, plus some additional labor from the teams, if I'm honest, for everybody else that contributed. So there's a little bit more time than that. But the OCM system, the big winner here, where we were driving more traffic, a third of our customers to the OCM, was already in place. We just weren't using it. And it had some improvements that need to be made to how well the interface was between the customer and our team. So some changes there, but really the system didn't cost us anything to put in place. Just changing the procedure and training our team to answer questions better, find the information better, and route customers toward the online and email systems was a big win. We think it saves about $57,000 a year. It's actually probably double that, because we think we saved, at least 4 people of headcount there. And that's about $1.23 million in savings on the other end, which is the customer satisfaction side. We think we're going to keep more customers. The customers can be more satisfied, tell their fellow companies about our business, about Elevon. And just those are soft savings, right? There's no way to prove that. other than we know that the customer feedback we were getting was much better than it was before. And so you can draw a correlation between that and customer retention rates and that sort of thing. But the hard savings for this project were really the fact that we avoided the cost of hiring more employees. And actually, if employees left due to natural attrition, we may not have to replace them because we're able to handle the now lessened call volume and do it more efficiently. So 12-month ROI, 577%. What does that really mean? Well, the amount of money we spent on this project paid itself back in about 7 weeks, which is awesome. And this is really typical, honestly, for a Lean Six Sigma Greenbelt team. I'll train 20, 30 people in a company, group them into teams of 2, and every single project's getting $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, $1 million in savings, just by looking at their process in a new way and finding a way to get rid of the waste and make it a better experience for both the employee and the customer that they serve. And that is how you eliminate or minimize call abandonment in a call center. But hopefully, even if you don't work in a call center, you can see how these same principles of structured problem solving using the DMAIC process, getting to the root cause, experimenting with new ways of doing a process that maybe you've done for years, how all of that contributes to your success, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what your team does for their day-to-day work. These same principles apply, right? Lean Six Sigma started in manufacturing, but it's moved to healthcare, it's moved to other service industries. And everybody benefits by these very simple principles of identifying the waste in your process, improving the flow, and creating a process that really does a better job of serving your customers. I hope you enjoyed the example. Please check out the other examples that we have either in the training or online. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us. My email is cedro@leansixsigmatoolbox.com.